Hi, my name is Cindy Veldhuis, and I am a research psychologist and an associate research scientist at Columbia University in the School of Nursing. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about a study that I've been conducting on stressors in health and sexual and gender minority women's relationships. Part of the impetus for this study is that LGBT people experience very high levels of stress, higher than cisgender heterosexual people. And we know from the literature on relationships that they're generally good for health, particularly for heterosexual people, but this is woefully under-researched among LGBT people. So I wanted to understand, what's the role of relationships in sexual minority women's health? And by sexual minority women, I'm referring to anyone who identifies as bisexual, lesbian, queer, or anything essentially other than being strictly heterosexual. And my particular focus is on problematic alcohol use, as that's one of the areas where there's the greatest health inequities among queer women. So I want to understand, are relationships as productive for sexual minority women as they are for heterosexuals? And do those levels of protection vary by sexual identity, by race, ethnicity, and by partner gender? And what are the different stressors that may be affecting these couples? So these health disparities that I investigate affect a not insignificant proportion of the populace. According to recent Gallup data from 2021, 5.6% of the population, or over 18 million people, identify as LGBT. And in New York, 5.1% of people identify as LGBT, which is the 8th largest population of LGBT people in the US. And there are over 789,000 same-sex couples in this state. And of those, over 2,600 live in New York City. 48% of those couples are same-sex female, 20% are Latinx, and 12% are Black. So part of the goal of my research is to understand all of the different stressors that may affect same-sex couples, same-sex female couples in particular. And the focus in my research is on the individual nested within the couple. And in the qualitative interviews that I'm conducting for my study, which I'll describe in a little bit, I want to understand how all of these other spheres of influence may affect them and their health behaviors. So for example, at the interpersonal level, I want to understand the effects of families, children, social support. At the community level, I want to understand the impacts of social networks, neighborhoods, LGBT communities, social services, social norms, all of those kinds of things. So the idea is that there are multiple sources of stress affecting individuals and couples. And cutting across all of the different levels are minority stressors. And these are stressors that come from having a marginalized identity that's been marginalized within a society. So data for the study come from the So Queer study, which is a study on queer intimate relationships, which is a mixed method study of diverse women in same-sex and same-gender relationships living in the New York City area. This study is funded by Columbia Nursing. The pilot for the study, which is the data that I'll be presenting today, was funded by Columbia Nursing from an intramural grant. And the larger study that's currently underway is funded by an NIH K99R00. So this is a mixed method study of women in same-sex, I already said that. Women were recruited primarily through social media for a large online survey that included 362 individuals. And we asked questions about relationship quality, general and minority stressors, discrimination, microaggressions, mental health. And then we did qualitative interviews with 8 couples. And we chose those couples based on diversity of age, race, ethnicity, and then drinking behaviors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the methods for the qualitative interviews of the couples particularly. So what I did was I had couples come into the lab. This is back when we could have people come into the lab and talk to me about their relationship. And they created for me a timeline of their relationship from the day that their relationship started until their eventual deaths. And so everything that's happened in their relationship and everything that they anticipate happening in the future. And this is a modified version of the relationship timeline that Alan LeBlanc and David Frost created. So this is an example of a timeline. So this is a couple that talks about the day that they met, when they moved in together. M starts graduate school, they try to conceive, M gets pregnant, they buy a house, and then M graduates. And so onto that, I had them tell me how much stress each of these events caused for them as a couple. And so for example, the day that they met wasn't very stressful. It's a 2 on a scale of 0 to 10, whereas trying to conceive is a 10 on a scale of 0 to 10. And then onto that, I had them overlay how much they remember drinking at the time of each of those events. And then finally, I had them tell me whether or not they thought that each of these events was associated with minority stressors, so the marginalization of them as a couple, and they marked those with stars. So for example, moving in together is associated with a minority stressor because they encountered a landlord who asked questions like, why do you need one bedroom for 2 women? And are you 2 sisters? So things like that. So I'm not going to talk about the data a ton, but I want to kind of pique your interest a little bit. And this study yielded a ton of data, even though it was just a pilot study and even though we just interviewed 8 couples. So what I want to show you briefly is some of the timeline data. And the timelines allowed us to look at changes in drinking across different relationship stages. It's something that's not been previously done among sexual minority women. There's only been one study to my knowledge that's sort of talked about this, and that was a qualitative study, and it wasn't really even the goal of the study. But one of the participants talked about how she felt like her drinking changed based on the relationship stage. So when she was like early in dating, just meeting someone, she was drinking a lot because she needed it for anxiety, for social lubrication. As the relationship became more committed, more intimate, she calmed down a little bit. She felt less stressed, and so her drinking went down. And then when there was tension in the relationship, when they broke up, when they were fighting, then her drinking would go up. So I wanted to look at those kinds of dynamics within, like, across different relationships and across the timelines of those relationships. So a couple of things that are interesting. So this first categorization of relationship stages I called testing the waters. And this is when couples are trying to figure out whether or not the other person might be interested in them, whether or not the other person might be queer. And that was associated with the lowest rates of binge drinking across all of the different timeline stages. And then dating in firsts, so that's, first kiss, first date, first sex, things like that. 34% of those events had binge drinking associated with them. Deepening the relationship is when they get more committed. Maybe they move in together, maybe they get a cat together. Fights and tension, I think that's pretty obvious. Distance is when they maybe move out of each other's homes, when they maybe are living at a distance, in some way that they're getting distance from each other. So dating first, deepening the relationship, and distance are the ones that have the highest rates of binge drinking. And then I also looked at different things that may sort of be in the sphere of influence on the couple. So loss and trauma, big changes, graduation, things like that, friends and family, and how all of those were associated with binge drinking. So just to bring all of this together, sexual minority women are at disproportionately higher risk of hazardous drinking and other health issues, and relationships seem to play a key role in drinking behaviors and in buffering against stressors. And the level of protectiveness that relationships play varies by sexual identity, race, ethnicity, and the interactions between them. And I didn't talk about that today, but that's some of what my other research shows. And preliminary analyses that I showed you today suggest that there may be some links between relationship stages and binge drinking. Some of the public health implications of this are that relationships are a really good site for interventions to build capacity and to provide tools to buffer against stress. But we need more research on queer women's couple relationships, and particularly among bisexual women, women of color, to understand the differential risks and resiliencies and how to reduce any kinds of risks. And then finally, policies that reduce discrimination may have positive implications for both relationships and well-being. So I want to just show some acknowledgements, my funding sources, my mentors, my collaborators, my research assistants, and the participants in our studies, and my queer accountability group, which has helped me keep on track. And this shows who should be included in research, which is everyone. And this is me and contact information for me. Thank you so much for your time.